Listen up, the time is now. Hear Lewayne spin tales of dragons, red herrings, legends, suspense, and love. It's story by story by story by.
Hi, welcome back to the Story By podcast. Thanks for stopping by. For today's show, I brought back Private Eye Jack Riley for his second adventure. Jack is hired to find another missing daughter. This time it's Betsy, the daughter of Jimmy Giant Jackson, a local crime boss. And just to make things more difficult, Jimmy's goon Otto is tagging along. Like the previous Jack Riley story, it's a product of, well, not the time it inhabits, but it's modeled after the pulps of that time. So, some characters say and do things that may offend modern sensibilities. If that's not your thing, I totally understand. There'll be something different next episode. For now, let's head over to the office of Jack Riley, private investigator, and see if he can find Daddy's little girl. Rumor has it that Jimmy Giant Jackson actually took an axe to a guy's knees when the guy lipped off about Jimmy's height. That rumor's been enough to keep anyone else from cracking wise. It also helped Jimmy and his boys get their piece of the city. They don't run it all, because Jimmy's got red hair and no vowels at the end of his name, but they've got my neighborhood. Probably why he came to me when someone snatched his little girl. He's practically my landlord. "Jack Riley, Private Dick," Jimmy said. He put a light to a cigar with stumpy fingers shiny with rings, and added, "You couldn't get a real job after you got back from killing Japs?" I shrugged. He looked around my office, made a show of it, taking his time. "You any good?" I shrugged. "What, no snappy Bogart patter?" I shook my head. Jimmy poked the ape in the shiny suit that stood beside him. "Jack always was a talkative bastard." The thug nodded, said, "No foolin'." Jimmy swiveled a chair, turned toward a wiry, sharp dresser leaning against the wall. "Sean, Jack's a war hero, ain't you, Jack?" Jimmy turned back toward my desk. His feet stuck out over the lip of the seat like a little kid's. "Sean was in the war, too. Aced a ton of krauts." I nodded. "You just come here to shake your willies at me?" Jimmy reddened. The muscled goon tensed, hand sliding into his jacket, ready to do his job. Nothing of the Iceman on the wall moved, except for his eyes. "You cheap gumshoe," the thug started. Jimmy raised his hand, cutting him off. "Jack's just showing us how tough he is, aren't you, Jack?" "No," I replied. Jimmy sat back in the client chair, puffed on his Cuban for a moment, then said, "Okay, it's Betsy." "Betsy?" "His little girl," the tough guy said, hand still in his jacket. "She's missing." "Otto, shut up," Jimmy said, "and get your hand off your gat. Jack and I are old friends." "No, we're not." Jimmy bit back the rage I saw in his eyes. After a couple seconds and another puff on his cigar, he settled down and said, "My daughter's been kidnapped. I want you to find her." I nodded, told him my rates. "Whatever," Jimmy snapped. "Whatever it takes to get my Betsy back." Jimmy's goon handed me an envelope with pictures and a ransom note. I looked both over. I had expected a kid, but Jimmy's girl looked somewhere between 17 and 21. She also looked like a movie starlet, complete with blonde waves, all the right curves, even a little beauty mark near her lip. "She must take after her mother," I said. "God rest her," Jimmy said. "Annabelle was one of a kind." "She must have been to overlook your shortcomings." The thug took a step and growled. Jimmy stood up in the chair, roared, "You son of a bitch!" Sean didn't move, except for his eyes. "Settle down, Jimmy," I said. "It's just some of that snappy Bogart patter you wanted. Now when did she go missing?" "Day before yesterday." Jimmy said.
She went out to the museum, then some shopping.
She didn't have protection? Jimmy scowled, looked over at his thug. Otto hung his head, said, She went into the powder room and she didn't come out. I looked at the ransom note. We have your daughter. For $50,000 you get her back alive. We'll call you. They call you?
No.
You get the money?
I can.
You see anything? I asked Otto. Otto shook his head. You? I asked Sean. I wasn't along. Which powder room? Otto continued staring at the floor, but said, Feldman's, first floor, ladies' lounge. Any suspects?
Everybody loves me,
Jimmy said. When I didn't say anything, he added,
Patrick's been trying to move into my territory. Betsy said he's had guys tailing her. It's why Otto's been keeping her company.
I stood, grabbed my jacket from the back of my chair.
Otto wants to go with you,
Jimmy said. I shook my head. I gotta make up for what I did, Otto mumbled. Buy her an ice cream when I bring her back, I said. Jimmy hopped down from the client chair and headed toward the door. Sean moved off the wall as Jimmy passed him. Otto stayed rooted to his spot. I sighed. Jimmy looked the lug over, then said,
Take him, he isn't any good to me.
With that, Jimmy and Sean walked out my office door. Otto watched them go with a hangdog look on his face. Cheer up, big fella. We're going shopping. The big mook smoked about a pack of cigarettes on the way to Feldman's, but he didn't say a word. When I pulled up to the curb a block from the store, he finally said, You ever do any bodyguarding? Some. You never made a mistake? I know what I'm doing. I don't need no cheap gumshoe telling me how to do my job. Somebody needs to, I said. Then I got out of the car and started up the street. I heard Otto slam the door behind me, and his heavy tread moving up beside me. You think you're some tough guy, don't you? I shrugged. I could take you with one arm behind my back. Be better if you kept both hands out front, ready to protect Jimmy's daughter. Otto grabbed my shoulder. I stopped, turned, and said, You lost the girl, not me. You want her back? You do what I say. Otto's teeth ground together and his grip tightened on my shoulder. You want to be butch, you do it after the job is done, I said. His hand dropped from my shoulder. Now let's find the store janitor. Within 5 minutes, I'd located a colored guy named Lincoln who did the cleaning up. A handshake and some green, and he was willing to close off the ladies for maintenance, long enough for me to look around. The tile echoed as I walked through the empty lavatory. Decorative stalls, shiny fixtures, and a stained glass window made the place look more elegant than St. Pete's Cathedral. I pulled a small plush seat to the window and hoisted myself up to look at it. After a moment, I was satisfied that I knew how the girl had gone out. I returned the chair to its spot and headed out of the powder room. Thank you very much, Mr. Lincoln, I said to the janitor. I appreciate it. I shook his hand again, leaving him another bill. Any time, sir, he said, tipping his hat. He shuffled off. Otto said, Mr. Lincoln? Your mother didn't teach you to respect your elders? Not no darky. I let it go, figuring there wasn't any point. So tell me what exactly you were doing when Betsy got snatched. I was standing right here waiting for her. Then they carried her right past you, because there's no other way out of there. The window doesn't open. The way Otto shuffled his feet, I should have seen the punch coming. His hand-fisted hook rocked me sideways. I hit the wall, ricocheted off, and came back with a sloppy punch of my own. If I'd had my feet under me, I'd have folded Otto in half. Instead, I just pushed him back. His hand snaked into his jacket, and I lunged forward. I caught him in a clinch with his hand pinned between us. Otto swung his body, trying to toss me. As he stepped wide to turn, I drove a knee up, flattening his boys. He groaned and sagged, and I kneed him again, then shoved. The lug stumbled backward, his hand coming out of his jacket as he tried to keep his balance. I kicked his legs out from under him. When he crashed to the ground, I stepped on his gut and said, You ever pull a gun on me, and Jimmy's going to need new muscle. I knelt, dug the pistol out of his shoulder rig, and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Now get up before the store dick comes by. Otto struggled to his feet and remained slightly hunched over. Cheap shot, he wheezed. What do you expect from a cheap gumshoe? Get moving. Otto lumbered through the store, bumping at least half a dozen high-end dames who each went looking for a manager to complain to. I got him into the car and pulled away from the curb. He stuck a smoke in his pie hole and lit it. Now where are we headed? He said with a plume of smoke. I cornered, said Giant Jimmy's. Why for? I'm going to let him know you're an accomplice in his baby girl's kidnapping. Then he can get his axe or have that skinny hardcase Sean work on you. What? What are you talking about? I wheeled around another corner, cut into an alley, and slid up along the wall. I hefted the .45 I brought back from the war and cocked it. Only way for her to go out of that ladies' room is past you. Either you weren't there, she wasn't there, or you let it happen. He shifted, realized his door wouldn't open far enough, and sighed. I let it happen, but I gotta explain something. I can't wait. So he told me. When he finished, I lowered the hammer, stuck my gun away, and said, All right, let's go. He lit another cigarette as I headed back out into the street. His hands trembled, shaking ash into his lap. A half hour later, we were out of the city, dusk had come, and Otto had tossed his crushed and empty pack out the window. Funny you getting yourself into a situation like this. Otto shrugged. Not the first guy, probably not the last. Otto shrugged again, then said, Left at the cow. I turned, passing a cow-shaped sign that said Black Farm Angus, and headed up a country lane toward a farmhouse. You want to wait in the car? No, I'm expected. Then you go in first. I'll be right behind you. I pulled up and cut the engine. Otto and I got out and headed toward the back door. A flashlight snapped on, stopping Otto, who raised a hand to shield his eyes. I stood behind him, protected from the glare. It's me, Otto said. The light snapped off and Otto advanced to the door. I followed him through the mudroom, returning his pistol as we entered the kitchen.
Looks like we'll need another place setting,
said Betsy Jackson as she put a fully loaded plate on a candle-lit table for two. I'd appreciate it, I said. Then I think we might want to figure out what you're going to tell your father. Betsy's baby blues looked Otto over.
The plan's busted, isn't it?
Otto hung his head.
It's okay, baby, Betsy told him. Have a seat, mister. I'll get you a plate.
Otto dragged another chair to the table while Betsy rustled up some food for me. Then we all sat. So, Otto tells me you and he...
We're together, yeah.
Betsy put her hand on Otto's big paw and smiled in a way that the girls do in sappy movies. And you thought faking your kidnapping was a good way to make your escape and score some green for a honeymoon? When she didn't answer, I added, You didn't figure he'd try to find you? She shrugged. You couldn't do it the old-fashioned way?
Daddy, I love Otto and I want to marry him.
You don't think I'm good enough, Otto rumbled. I'm just around to do the heavy stuff. I shook my head, trying to figure this one out.
I forgot a knife,
Betsy said, and stood across the kitchen. When the window exploded and Betsy spun sideways, throwing some blood in the air. Otto's jaw dropped and he dove to cover his girl. I hit the floor, pulled my .45, and scooted toward the window. More glass shattered and the little kitchen gadgets on the counter started jumping and dancing. When the Tommy gun paused, I popped up, aim, and shoot, and cracked off 3 rounds. The machine gunner dropped, wailing. The guy beside him sagged and folded silently to the ground, and the third gunman dove to the ground, swearing. I dropped back to the floor as more shots ripped through the broken window. Otto. Nothing. Otto, you hit? I looked over at the massive shape on the floor and saw he was shaking. I belly crawled over. Are you crying? Can it? Otto screamed at me, tears streaking his face. Betsy's hurt. She's hurt bad. Then get off her. You're probably crushing her. Otto swung at me, but I'd already scooted away and headed out of the kitchen. I cleared the doorway and crouched along, trying to peek out other windows. The guy I hadn't blasted still seemed to be shooting up the kitchen. I couldn't see any others. I made my way through a dining room to the front door and reached for the doorknob. It turned. I rolled sideways, tucked myself between the door and the window, and waited. A moment later, another gunman crept through the door into the room. As he turned to shut the door, I whipped my .45 across his face, smashing his nose. He cried out, fell back, dropped his gun, and slapped both hands to his face. I clubbed him again with my pistol, and he dropped. I collected his rod from the floor and tucked it into my waist, the small on my back. Then I went out the front door. Coming around the corner of the house, I saw 2 cars that hadn't been there when Otto and I arrived. How many gunnies in each car? 2? 4? A dozen? I dropped 3, and I knew there was at least one still breathing. Something moved. Aim and shoot. And I dropped the hammer on the 4th gunman. Then a bullet splintered the wood siding above my head, and I dove and rolled. Another muzzle flash, and I had my target. Aim and shoot. The .45 roared, and a figure tumbled from a nearby tree and crashed to the ground. I caught a flash of movement near one of the cars. Flame burst into life as a man lit the rag fuse on a Molotov cocktail. He cocked his arm to throw it, and I squeezed the trigger. The bottle exploded, covering the bomber in liquid fire. He shrieked, started running toward the house, fear and pain driving him. I fired again, shooting a leg out from under him. He collapsed, still wailing. My next shot silenced him, except for the sizzling of his cooking flesh. I ejected the empty magazine and reached for another. Something huge crashed into me, throwing me to the ground. I lost my .45 and the spare mag. I tumbled around, trying to slip the bear hugs of a thug that seemed determined to crush me. Every time I wiggled free, he caught an arm or a leg and pulled me back. When I landed the last time, he rolled up on me, pinning me to the ground. I felt the piece I'd pulled off the guy in the house dig in my back, but I couldn't get my hand wiggled in behind me to get to it. Blindly, I struck out with a free hand and caught the guy on the side of the head. His head rocked sideways and he reared back. I made a move to get out from under him and he slammed me back to the ground. Then he hoisted me high in the air to slam me down again. I pulled the piece and emptied it into his face. We both crashed to the ground and I rolled around looking for a weapon. I found my .45, then found the clip a moment later. I slid the magazine home, dropped the slide, brought the pistol up as a flashlight beam hit me. "Riley, it's Sean." "Get the light out of my face." Sean clicked the light off and said, "I took care of the other couple guys." I squeezed the trigger twice. Sean didn't move. "I must have missed a couple," he said, turning to look at the two dead men behind him. Swinging around, looking for more targets, I said, "What are you doing here?" "Otto called. He said Betsy was hurt. To get out here and don't tell Jimmy." I tucked away my pistol, said, "Inside," and headed toward the house. Otto appeared in the doorway, carrying Betsy. Blood covered him, and a lot of her. "My car's over this way," Sean said, gesturing for Otto and me to follow. I helped Otto get the girl into the car, then said, "Whose house is this?" "Rental," Otto croaked back, sliding into the back seat. "Fake names, cash?" "Yup." "Okay, boys," I said to Sean and Otto, "here's the story." Once I was sure they had it straight, they took off, and I walked back to the gunmen's cars. "Sloppy work, Jack," I said to myself. "You got tailed." I searched the cars and the bodies. Most of the guys had Mick names, and none of those names matched the car papers. The cars themselves had plenty of guns, and one had a case of bottles loaded and ready to go. I grabbed a few of the cocktails and walked to the house. Lighting the first one from the smoldering remains of the firebomber, I tossed it through the window. The sun erupted in the kitchen, and rivulets of fire climbed the walls. I repeated the process in each corner of the house, then tossed the last cocktail into one of the cars. I got in my car and headed back down the lane, watching the growing column of fire in the rear view. As far as Giant Jackson knows, his baby girl got snatched by Nicky Patrick's gang. Otto, with a little help from a cheap gumshoe named Riley, found her, freed her, and took out a bunch of Patrick's boys along the way. Jackson's pet doctor patched up Betsy, who'd caught a round in the upper arm. The Sawbones did good enough work that Betsy got to wear a sleeveless wedding dress. Giant Jackson, impressed by Otto's heroic exploits and grateful for the return of his daughter, consented to allow the marriage. He even sprung for it, going all out. About 3 hours into the reception, Sean wandered over to me and said, "You hear about Patrick?" I shook my head. "He had a fatal accident, cleaning his gun and shot himself." He paused, lit a cigarette, added, 6 times. "Your work?" Sean shrugged. We stood silently for a time, both watching the crowd of people. In the middle of the dance floor, Otto swung Betsy around in one of those Irish whirligig dances. "He owes you big." "Jimmy paid me." Sean snorted. "I meant Otto." I shrugged, said, "Worked out okay. Otto gets to be a hero, Jimmy lets them get married, and they didn't have to go on the lam." "Cupid's got nothing on you, you sentimental sap." I shrugged again, tipped back my beer. "Let me know the next time you're going to shoot a bunch of people," Sean said. "I had a good time." "I don't go looking for trouble." Sean blew smoke out his nose, said, "Like hell." A brunette in a bridesmaid dress walked by. Sean watched her for a moment, then said, "I think I'm going to look for some right now." He dropped his cigarette into his beer bottle, set the bottle on the table, and said, "See you around, Jack." "Hey, Colleen," Sean said, catching up to the bridesmaid. I took another swig of my beer and watched the room. Out on the dance floor, the song ended, another began, and Giant Jackson stepped up to his little girl. She had at least a foot on him, but they danced together like they'd done it all their lives. Daddy's Little Girl originally appeared in Blazing Adventures magazine, issue number 9. It was a bit of a departure from the previous issues, which had been online only. Issue 9 was a paperback print edition and more of an anthology collection than a straight magazine. Released to coincide with the mystery convention BoucherCon, it included a foreword by Gary Levisi, editor of Hardboiled, who described Daddy's Little Girl thusly. It involves a sultry blonde and a goon right out of Moose Mallory via Chandler. Great fun, full of action, violence, and heart. So, thanks to Mr. Levisi for the love, and special thanks to Robert S. P. Lee, editor of Blazing Adventures, for giving Jack Riley a place to hang his holster. Blazing Adventures really was the place where pulp lives. And while I'm at it, thanks to you, dear listener, for coming back week after week. I really appreciate it. I hope you stop by again for more of the Story By podcast.